Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in into another episode of The Waiting List. I am joined by my two co-hosts, Daniel and Long Long. And I say this every episode, but you guys already know who they are. So maybe we should just stop wasting time at the intros. But anyways, we have a guest today, Mr. Federico Tan. Welcome onto The Waiting List, Fed.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Fed and I had a good chat yesterday, and Long and Dan have actually met him in person. They're friends, so I'm really looking forward to this from a personal standpoint, because I think we've raised a lot of cool topics that personally I'm really interested in. So yeah, let's just jump into it. So for the first little bit, I want to introduce Fed to our audience members. He is the founder of Advisory Council, a creative agency that works in marketing and communications, primarily in both fashion and art industries. He represents brands such as Ambush, Palm Angels, and Sakai, to name a few. And Fed also works extensively in the art space, with his past projects being with artists such as Murakami, Cos, and Futura. Actually, on the topic of Futura, Fed, I'm really into sneakers, and that's kind of how I learned English for a little bit. So when I was stalking your Instagram yesterday, I didn't know that you actually worked with Futura until I saw your photos, and I was like, this is so cool, because actually the first sneaker I ever remember liking and screenshotting and saving it on my phone was his Nike SB Dunk High for the Love of Money, which this was in the early 2010s. And then at that time, that shoe was going for $10,000. I can't imagine how much it's going for now. I remember it came with a skateboard with all the currencies. But yeah, it's really cool to see you guys collaborating and working on projects.
Oh yeah, no, Lenny Futura is a really great guy. He's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. Mm-hmm. And he's just such a talented artist, but also he's a bag full of stories. He's been through, I guess, quite an interesting journey throughout his art life, and actually his personal life as well. So if you ever get a chance to meet him in one day, I would love to introduce you, but he's a great person to just have a chat with.
Okay. I mean, sure. I'll go to Hong Kong. I'll go to Hong Kong for that. That would be a dream come true. Oh, now I wish I had his skateboard or something to ask him. His signature is so cool. That guy just had broad strokes and so much character.
Yeah, for sure.
Jacqueline's been on about getting you on for ages, Fed. So I'm not sure just stalking your Instagram for one day is actually the truth. I think it's actually probably been happening for a while. I'm actually surprised it took us so long to get you on, to be honest. But she's like, we need to get Fed on. I'm like, all right, chill out. Jeez.
Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, that was really cool to see. So anyways, let's go on to the first question. I gave you a very brief introduction for the audience, but for those who are listening, can you just briefly introduce yourself again, where you were born, grew up, went to school, and any previous job experiences before you got into the current industry and your current job?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Fed Tan. I'm ethnically Chinese, but I was born and raised in the Philippines. And for university, I left the Philippines and went to the States, to New York, and went to school at NYU. So I did a couple years at Stern, and then afterwards, I jumped into the management consulting world, and I worked for Deloitte Consulting and a few other firms for a few years before I left that industry and decided to start from scratch and jump into the fashion game. I worked at I guess I got my break into the fashion world by working for a small creative design studio in Hong Kong. who specialized actually in film, and then shortly thereafter in fashion. And I guess my first kind of like break or first real exposure was working with Lane Crawford, who was my first client when I worked at that creative design studio. And that was a really kind of eye-opening experience in terms of like the people I met and sort of like the experiences I gained doing that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You know, when we talk about fashion, well, I'm not really good with fashion, but say in the West, right? Everyone's like, I want to work for Vogue and yeah, basically Vogue, right?
Basically Vogue.
Yeah, so is Lane Crawford like the equivalent in Asia where, well, in Hong Kong anyways, like where you first start?
Well, it's not really, well, you know what it is? I'd say Lane Crawford is more like an institution in Hong Kong. Like it's obviously, I mean, globally or historically, it's one of the oldest department stores in the world, right? So they've obviously been in this retail and fashion game, you know, for quite a long time, and they have a deep heritage in it. So I would say, like, you know, most people, I would say, especially in Hong Kong, know who Lane Crawford is, and because of the heritage, the team, the organization, you know, obviously it's a great way to kind of, let's say, get started and learn everything about the industry. So for me, like for having them as a client, sort of like, you know, first off the bat, like, you know, I just joined this creative design studio called Sha La La, who was led by this photographer called Wing Sha. Actually, Wing Sha, he is, I'd say, famously known for working closely with Wong Kar-wai. He shot all the film stills and designed the movie posters for movies like In the Mood for Love, or 2046, for example. So that's kind of like his specialty. And because of sort of like his reputation in the film world, and then the fashion world came calling, right? So companies like Lane Crawford or Vuitton wanted him to work on projects. So when I was working at that time with Wing Sha and his company, I got a chance to basically kind of, I guess, be an account manager and take care of those clients. And I guess working with Lane Crawford is sort of like, oh my God, now you can work with an institution like Lane Crawford that has, you know, that works with all these great, amazing fashion brands. And because of its history, then that's sort of like where I kind of like early on, in my younger days, kind of picked up on fashion quite quickly. So is it kind of like an equivalent of Vogue? Yeah, in a way, maybe there's that history and that brand recognition. But I think more importantly, it was just sort of like, you know, if you were just really into that industry and you want to just learn, it was a good first step.
I see.
Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, I've got the question, which is just taking it back a little bit. You said you started from scratch and you went straight into fashion. I just wanted to clarify, you're in some management consultancy. Did you have clients then and then went through, or what made you take that jump to go into fashion from scratch from what you were doing? What was the decision process?
Well, the reason why I said from scratch, we had this, Jacqueline and I had this conversation. I graduated from Stern at NYU. So it was a business school, business program. And typically when you're in these business programs, you're kind of like, in a way, led to think that the best job options for you are either in finance or in management consulting. During that period when I graduated quite a long time ago.
Still like that.
Still like that. Great. Okay. So to be quite frank, I had the choice when I graduated to actually go straight into the fashion industry. I could have actually worked at Saks Fifth Avenue, kind of like a Lane Crawford equivalent in New York. But then I also had a job offer to go to Deloitte Consulting. And to be quite frank, when you're young and a company offers you double the pay, you end up going for the money, right? Because you're like, you know, you're a struggling student and a little bit of money would be nice at that particular point. So I went in and did management consulting because I thought that was like the financially sound decision. And then two, there's also a bit of a prestige factor to it where, you know, they only chose 12 candidates that year from the entire, let's say, recruiting pool to join the analyst program. So I did that. So it was neat because, like, in a way, like, I never regretted doing it because I met all these interesting people. The company had an excellent training program, and they also kind of quickly immersed you into the consulting world by throwing you into interesting client situations. So I did a lot of projects in let's say, within 2 years where I did a lot of work in the pharmaceutical industry. But there was also one moment that I got pulled in to work on a project for Ralph Lauren. So in a way, I did get a bit of my taste of the fashion game by working in consulting. So that was kind of neat to actually work at Ralph Lauren, because again, it was one of those situations where I'm like, I always read about Ralph Lauren, but you never would have thought that you would work at the brand that you kind of like just read about.
Mhm.
So I did that project for a few months, and then shortly thereafter, I actually escaped the traditional management consulting world and worked for tech startup. It was an internet or tech consultancy that specialized. Actually, it was a management consulting firm, but specialized, I guess, in that digital or internet world. And I did that for another year. And by doing that, I got recruited to come to Hong Kong for a similar job, which is what got me to Hong Kong after New York.
Mhm. So,
You know,
okay, I have a question.
yeah.
So to those who are listening, right, it sounds like, okay, you graduated from a biz school and then you went into management consulting for 2 years, and then you went to a and during that 2 years, you got exposed to, clients such as Ralph Lauren, and then you went into the tech startup and then went into the creative scene in management, still like kind of consulting scene in Hong Kong. But would it be accurate to say that there was um, always this sprouting interest of fashion and art inside of you while you were pursuing different careers? Because maybe like to our audience, it sounds a little bit like jumpy to, okay, yeah, Fed went from business school to consulting and then was exposed to creative clients, and then finally make the jump into like marketing and communications for the art industry. Was it, first of all, like the first question is, have you always been interested in like fashion? Was there always that sprouting interest? And second of all, like the turning point, if you could pinpoint a specific turning point, be it like a moment or thought, like what would it be?
Look, to be honest, like I've always really been into fashion. That was something I've always wanted to do. So even through university days, it's sort of like, New York, NYU, it was located in Soho, right? I'm sorry, let me backtrack that. So NYU was located in, I guess, Greenwich Village, right? It's sort of like, it's technically downtown, and it was sort of like a stone's throw away from Soho, East Village, and the West Village. And sort of like during the time I was in New York, that was sort of like where I guess a lot of, let's say, the interesting fashion, let's say, communities were popping up. Like Soho was already established as a fashion center, but not quite like it is today, which is a lot more gentrified. Back then, you had like younger brands who open up stores. So, obviously by going to school in that whole kind of like downtown area and also living in that area, you always discover new things. And I was always really, really interested. Okay. And then I always, let's say, I even remember going to a boutique called If, which I don't think exists anymore. But that was sort of like my first exposure to this brand, Margiela, right? Martin Margiela was kind of like, at that time, was sort of like still kind of like a youngish brand, and kind of discovering that brand. I was like, oh my God, who is this person or this brand? And I was just like really enamored by it, right? And sort of like, I would say like, even till this day, when people ask me about what I think about fashion, it always goes back to that moment when I discovered something like Margiela and how it inspired you to do what you do. So the short, without kind of like dragging this conversation on, but the short answer is that I've always been into fashion, and sometimes I feel like after university I should have just gone straight into fashion and not, quote unquote, waste my time in management consulting. But in my early years, I kind of always thought that. But to be quite frank, I'm really happy that I took that detour and did management consulting for a few years, because management consulting really trained me up to be more professional. It gave me a stronger foundation. And actually, in management consulting, they train you to be a professional and to like have a strong client service mindset, which to this day actually has, let's say, been very beneficial for me from what I do for a living.
Yeah.
So, in hindsight, I'm like, I wish I started earlier in fashion, but I'm just thankful that I had this detour because again, it gave me the foundation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Long Long.
Fed, were there people in your family that were really into fashion or love to dress up? Like, where did you get all this, I would say like inspiration from?
Oh, I got this from my older brother. So my older brother, he's the creative one in the family. So he actually used to be a fashion photographer. Now he's a film director. But
Mhm.
I was very close, or still close, with my older brother, and he kind of gave me that first taste of, I guess, the world of fashion and the creative worlds. He's a couple of years older than me. He left to go to New York early on, and then whenever he would come back home to the Philippines for the summers, then he would kind of like introduce me to these things. So of course, I caught the bug then. Then I moved to New York, and then my brother was already in that space. So then I would just always be sort of like very interested in it. So when he would do photo shoots, I would go in and assist, and just observe. I just kind of soaked it up.
I see.
So but and quite frankly, after university, I could have just gone straight into it. But it was more again about like, well, I did go to business school, so I thought I should put that degree into practice somehow.
Yeah.
But then fashion is a business on its own too, and anything would have applied wherever.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, I've got a question for Long Long actually, going on from what she just asked about Fed being interested in fashion, because I've always thought that Long Long's taste in fashion is, well, I think it's a
Well,
little bit different.
I wouldn't think so.
I think it's a little bit different to the other girls I see. And I just, you're I believe a single child, right? So where did you get your influences from?
Yeah, so this is why I asked Fed, because everyone in my family, right, wasn't so into it. I mean, like all the female figures were really vain, but it was, yeah. So for
But
me,
what does
right,
that mean though, vain?
no,
Like,
vain as in like
Like
uh,
new stuff.
as- no, like being very tight with the beauty regime, like having to get their
oh,
hair washed, doing
okay,
their nails and so on.
Uh,
But for me, I got exposed to everything when I went to university. So in England. So that was the first time I was like, wow, there's a McQueen store, that kind of thing. So that was like my first exposure. So I was wondering whether
mm,
for Fed it started from the family or it was way later on. Yeah.
mm,
okay.
I would say like it partially started from obviously with my brother, just
Hmm.
because he was already in that industry and I got that exposure from him. But at the same time, just because I was so into it, or I caught like that interest from him, then that's sort of like then I would obviously do my research, like like read through whatever magazines I could find,
Hmm.
go through any books I could find as well. And you understand, like obviously growing up in the Philippines. Like I said, I'm a lot older than the three of you. But growing up in the Philippines, you didn't really have a lot of access to this kind of stuff. So I think by also growing up in the Philippines, because you didn't have access to a lot of these brands, or it was limited, you just kind of like created your own imagination, right? And then when I moved to New York, and by kind of being dropped into New York from a place like the Philippines, all of a sudden this sort of like all this access that you've always kind of like just thought was not possible was just right in front of you. And I remember when I first got to New York, I think I freaked out my mom because I literally walked into every shop I could see, no matter what kind of shop it was. It was even like, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there's a street in New York called St. Mark's Place. And
yes.
St. Mark's, yeah. And then, St. Mark's is kind of like, I guess it's a bit more cleaned up now, but back in the day, it's a bit more seedy, where
Mm-hmm.
you had a lot of like stores that were like for kind of like punk rockers, right? So you go in that store, it's all like black leather and like studs.
Mm-hmm.
Or you'd have sort of like sketchy looking people on the street, and like and you understand, like you have this like Asian kid with like two traditional Asian parents, and you're dragging them into every single store. They're like, where are we? And then I think I remember like my mom and my dad, they were like, maybe we should bring you home now. We're not leaving you here. But
Sounds like Camden Market in London.
yeah, pretty much in a way. But in a way, like you understand, right? If on St. Mark's Place, it was also a very ethnically diverse community, and again, like with traditional parents, it's like also their first exposure. Like, why are there so many different ethnicities and races here? Why is everybody? Why are there so many people with tattoos here? You know, so in that sense, that was sort of like eye opening for all of us. But for me, I was just like really like enamored by it, and I just got sucked into it. And interestingly enough, but even by being with so many people with tattoos and whatnot, I don't have a single tattoo at all. And even though we had this conversation with Jacqueline, I'm really good friends with Dr. Wu, but none, zero tattoos. There's no ever any. I mean, I did think about getting one at some point, but I just figured like, you know what, I'm just gonna keep it clean.
Do you think?
I don't want to give your age away, Fed, but this is also a time where there's no real social media. Is that right?
That's right. There's no social media. And yes, I was part of the Internet 1.0 generation. I lived through the period of 56K modems, which I don't think Jacqueline would even know or have seen.
I don't think I've ever heard of that before, but not to say like give Dan, why would you say not to give his age away? Like, Fed,
Well,
are you
'cause
older
it's
than
just like, you know,
Daniel?
some people.
That
I
is
older
only
than
56.
I'm not 56. That's Daniel. I you know.
Well, okay.
My point was nothing actually to do with the age, except that's the part you focused on, Jacqueline. What I was actually trying to mention was a lot of these brands that Fed was talking would have been a lot more underground, a lot more like very niche, probably selective knowledge, rather than now where a lot of them do have very strong Instagram profiles, right, on the communication side.
Yeah, for
Exactly.
sure.
So you're right. So basically, the only way you could do research in terms of fashion, you couldn't Google anything at that point. You literally had to go to that country in that particular store who probably stocked that particular designer, in order to even get that item.
Yeah.
Right. You
Yeah,
couldn't.
yeah.
You couldn't you couldn't go to you can't just go to Grailed and say like, hey, does anybody have this vintage item? Like, you literally had to dig through, look for it. You know, I even remember my first pair of Margiela sneakers was like literally figuring out that there were like 2 stores in the world that could possibly have it. One in
That's
Hawaii,
insane.
and then one in Hawaii, and actually one back in the Philippines actually.
Wow.
And I was already in New York, and I had to just like call all these stores and badger them and say, hey, when you get a pair, I'll buy it from you. And then at that point, they're even like, how do we even get it to you? Yeah.
Wow. Like,
So,
what do you remember? What kind of sneakers were they? Were they the replicas?
well, they're called replicas now, but the replicas mine were the originals. So the replicas they're selling now, it's a replica of the original one that I got.
Do you still have it by any chance?
Yep. Yeah, of course I still do. And they're
Wow.
in pristine condition. They're the original, the German army trainers that were actually hand drawn by
shit.
the original Margiela design team.
Wow. I'm
How much
shook.
are those sneakers worth like right now?
I'm shook.
How much are they worth now?
Yeah. Because
A
because obviously Jacqueline's into sneakers, but I'm not like so into it. I'm sure a lot of the audience won't be as into it as Jacqueline. Like, give some perspective on what these sneakers are worth.
I mean, I don't know exactly what the specific sneaker would be worth now, because it's not really heavily traded, because there's no price references to it, right? It's one of those sort of like I you know what it is? It's almost like this, right? I'm not comparing in terms of like price points, but comparing in terms of like rarities in the watch world, right? It's almost like you were given an access to, let's say, an early FP Joint subscription model, right? Where there were only like maybe like what 20 to 30 or maybe 50. It's kind of like that, where there were like maybe, I think, no more than 50 to 100 pairs made of these sneakers, and literally each one had
is different. Yeah,
different. It was a different hand drawing to it.
Okay.
Yeah,
and the only difference also with these is that I never wore them.
You never wore them?
No, so they're completely dead stock. You know, I think the only time I wore them was basically I put them on my feet, walk around the house,
in the house,
back in the box.
Yeah.
And put them back in the box.
Same.
Yeah.
I used to sleep with my shoes on my bed.
Oh my god.
Really?
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I would use a little toothbrush and just brush
Oh, nice.
the soles. But okay, to answer your question, Dan, so like Margiela replicas are basically like a classic, like Converse, you know, when you think about Converse, it's like, okay, it's like a staple design. And then same with Margiela. It's a little bit, it's a lot more comfy, and the shape and the suede and leather combination it's classy. It's timeless. So what Fed is talking about is the original ones with the handwriting, that was, you know, that makes each pair unique. So I mean, I don't know how much they would be worth. Like, you can't find them, that's the thing, and probably you can't find them in dead stock condition. But Fed, like, why did you keep it dead stock? Was it because you cherished it so much that you didn't want to wear it, or at that time you knew that you would want to hold on to this piece of art for like the rest of your life without wearing it?
Well, firstly, it was so difficult to acquire. And the fact that I managed to, you know, it was so difficult to acquire that, and when I finally got them, I was like, man, I don't know if I could really wear this, you know. And it was just one of those. I guess that was my first real grail sneaker, or like fashion product, and then just to kind of get it, and it took so long to kind of get it that I'm like, oh my god, I have it now, and I'm like, I don't want to mess it up. You know? So I'm kind of glad I didn't mess it up. So.
Same.
It's still there. Yeah.
Wow, that's insane. Like, please snap a pic and show us. It would be like such a feast to see it. But I totally understand. Like, when I was collecting sneakers, right, I would buy, like, if I could find them, I would buy 2 pairs of the same one, rock one and then stock one. But then, like, now looking back, how much the sneaker game has changed. I mean, even more so for you probably, when you were buying it, like, the sneaker culture was more of the skate culture, right? And then for me, it was like, okay, when I went into it, it was the Nike SBs and the basketball shoes, because I was playing basketball at the time. And then SBs kind of died for a couple of years, and now they're really hot again. So, but I totally relate. I remember when I was, all like head over toes over the Nike SB City Packs, and my dream was to find the New York Pigeon, and I had 2 pairs of the Paris Dunks. I had 1 pair of the London and 1 pair of the Tokyo.
Wait, do you still have the Paris Dunks?
I do not. And like, honestly, like, one of my top, like, maybe top 5 regrets, I had a size 8.5. It was VNDS, which I wore, which was a little bit big for me at the time, but I still like wore it. I remember I wore it to Disneyland. and then I had a size 10 dead stock with the lace bags attached and the insoles and everything, and the silver box. I had a size 10 dead stock, like, that I got for like 2,800 from Soul Collector Forum. Now that pair, if you can auction it off, it's like at least 50,000, right? That I traded. Okay, long story short, anyways, I was such a dumb kid, right? I was like 13 or 14 at the time. I was just fascinated by the story of the Paris Dunk, right? Because of the painting and how it was, you know, cut off and whatever. That I traded it for, I don't even remember what I traded it for. I still remember the guy I traded it with. His name is Jigweezy or Jig Easy on YouTube. And it was this guy from Florida. And I was like, okay, I want to trade this for how many ever, I think it was with a Louis Vuitton Dawn sneaker and then something else. And then I traded it, but then he gave the shoes he sent me were, first of all, like, not good condition, and I was stupid, right? Like, I was a kid, I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't know what I had, obviously. So I was okay, this is not right. And then when I called him out, I was like, I don't want this anymore. And I still remember his response. He said, "I'm so sorry, my kid daughter spilled ink on the toe box." And as you know, the toe box of that shoe is this like tan, very fine suede. I was like, oh shit. Like, if it spilled ink, then there's no way you can get that ink out of the tan suede, because it's tan and it's suede. It's not even leather. But now in hindsight, he obviously was lying, right? He
Yep.
obviously was lying. Now I know because I'm 20 something, but back then I didn't know. Oh, I was scammed so many times. But yeah, I had the Paris Dunks, I had the Tokyos, had the Londons, I had the Yellow Lobsters, which was the friends and family from Concepts. I had a bunch of stuff. I was very heavy on Nike SB. I wish I had all of them now. I still have a few. I have the Mama Bears. Anyways, okay, we sidetracked, but yeah, I'm really into sneakers. Okay.
You definitely know your sneaker game. That's for sure.
I mean, that's how I learned my English. Don't forget.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. So yeah, again, we like know that you're very well versed in, you know, both fashion and art scenes. Has there been a moment that you felt like to you was the most challenging or most memorable? Was it like a project that you work on for a client, or like something else that you were pursuing at the time?
Yeah, of course. I always say the pivotal moment for me in terms of like the fashion game. So when I was 29 years old, I had the opportunity to become the head of marketing for Diesel in Asia Pacific, actually. And you know, this is like in around 2005. And at that point, I would say sort of like, you know, Diesel kind of like was at the peak of its sort of like popularity. You know, the brand was doing really well. It was recognized globally, and the growth was just sort of like, you know, incrementally every year, the growth was just really strong. And in 2005, the brand actually, so I had a chance to become the head of marketing for the brand. And one of my first mandates was to launch the brand in mainland China. And we're opening their first store in Shanghai at Plaza 66. And that was actually my first project. So I never thought that at that age, I'd end up becoming, I guess, in charge of marketing for a brand like Diesel. And also kind of get dropped in and say, okay, now launch your brand in mainland China. I mean, I had no idea. You know, it's my first time going to Shanghai. You know, it was my first time kind of being exposed to it. I even distinctly remember Vogue China just launched, you know, and I was like trying to have a meeting with Angelica Chung, the editor-in-chief of Vogue,
Oh, wow.
which I eventually had that meeting. And, you know, that also kind of started like this long-term friendship we've had. And so that sort of like first exposure was really interesting because everything was new. You know, you're meeting new people, the industry was developing and shaping. And, you know, I also worked on my first fashion show ever, you know. You know, we did this fashion show in Shanghai. We took the you know, what's the name of that building across Plaza 66, Daniel, where they have R21?
I don't know.
Well, it's that Shanghai Expo building. It's at that sort of historical building in front of Plaza 66. I remember.
I know the building you're talking about. I've never been in there.
Oh, no way. It's a great building. It's sort of like I believe it was a Russian influence building. So it's got these really interesting tall ceilings, interesting architecture. So I remember choosing that venue and doing that fashion show there. And again, I just had no experience. And to sort of like pull it off, you know, and I remember you know, while we were doing the show and everybody was there, the owner of the brand, Renzo, also was already in China. You know, all my bosses were there. And I remember getting pulled aside by one of my bosses. And he said to me, Fed, you've done a great job, but you got to relax now. You're too tense. So at that moment, in a way, kind of those words that he gave me, I just felt like, oh, you know, like no matter how stressful or how tense you are in a project, when you're, let's say you're public facing already, you can't be tense anymore, you know, because in the end, like you being tense or stressed out kind of shows, and that's going to make your guests feel uncomfortable. You know, and then so one of the other things as well that one of my, let's say, previous mentors, Antonella, would always tell me, if you want to be in the fashion game, especially in marketing communications, you got to learn to smile. And that was like a very important lesson to me, where regardless of the situation, no matter how stressed you are, no matter how difficult it is, you do have to learn to smile, because actually just by smiling, you end up feeling, okay, let's get on with it, because there's nothing really like nothing I would say would come across as like impossible to kind of overcome if you just have the will, or you just kind of just work through it, right?
I have a quick question before Long and Daniel ask theirs. For when you said you received the advice of keeping a happy face and out facing to the public, are you like in private a smiley person, or are you like the opposite, or have you kind of progressed and switched that, learned how to switch on and off?
Interestingly enough, although I am in the field of marketing communications, technically I'm very public facing. I do think I'm slightly introverted, right? Where there are times and weekends where I just don't want to see people, where I'm just happy staying at home, hanging out with my wife and daughter, but then when it's sort of like work mode, from like Monday to Friday, I'm just like constantly seeing people,
Yeah.
I could literally just have like essentially like 10 meetings a day, for example, right? And be talking to different kinds of clients, meeting different kinds of people. So I think, and maybe that's also probably why I've been able to do or be in this industry for such a long time, because I guess in a way, like in my own private time or in the weekends, I can just kind of like shut off from it.
Yeah.
And then kind of like when it's back to like the work week, I'm like ready to get back into it again.
Yeah. Long Long.
Fed, I want to say, you're welcome to be like, I allow you to just be frowning next time we meet.
We're all introverts here. We get it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so my question is, this is about imposter syndrome, right? So at what point do you feel like, hey, I deserve to be here, instead of being like, wow, at this age, why am I doing this? I can't believe I'm getting these opportunities. So at what age did you feel like, okay, I should be here?
I think that's a really good question. It probably took me 15 years deep in doing what I was doing to finally recognize that. Because at some point I just kept thinking I was just getting lucky, and I just kept thinking, man, I got lucky to pull this off. And then I get a second project, and then I felt like, okay, that was kind of lucky again, and then, I worked at Diesel for about 7 years. And throughout those 7 years, Diesel eventually became a group called Only the Brave. And then during that phase or period as well, Renzo also started acquiring more and more fashion brands. And actually Only the Brave they acquired Martin Margiela as well. So when Renzo was actually launching or trying to develop Margiela in Asia, I got a bit of let's say I had a hand in it. I was like given a hand in, let's say, helping grow the brand or launching the brand in Asia. So for me, you understand, like Margiela was my first step in saying, what, I might really want to do fashion. When I was obviously in my late teens and I discovered Margiela, it's like, oh my God, this is something I'd love to do if I ever got into fashion game. So to actually have it come full circle, where I worked for Diesel, and then I became somewhat close to Renzo also, and his family and his children, and also kind of getting exposed to like Margiela for the launch in Asia. I was like, oh my God, it's all coming full circle. And I just felt like, in a way, like I couldn't believe that these things were happening to me. So I just felt like I just kept getting lucky for a while. And I worked at Diesel, Only the Brave, for about 7 years. And then an opportunity came to basically do my own thing and go entrepreneurial. And that, I would say, was like the thing that freaked me out the most. Because I was leaving a company that everybody thought I would live and die in, just because of, I guess, how it meshed with my personality and how the company was structured. And then for me to say, hey, I'm leaving and I'm going to start my own thing, they're like, what? Why are you doing that? And also at that point, my daughter was just born. I just took on a new mortgage as well. So everybody was like, why would you do such a reckless thing when you obviously have a new mouth to feed? And I'm like, and I jumped into this entrepreneurial world where I had no idea how I was going to make money. I had no clue what it meant to be an entrepreneur. So So actually, in terms of like, I guess now if we talk about what you asked earlier, what was a challenging moment? So I would probably say there was like those 2 points. The one point was becoming the head of marketing at Diesel. And I guess the other major turning point was becoming an entrepreneur. Because that took me at least a year and a half to 2 years to really get used to it, to kind of like reprogram my mindset from going from working for somebody to working for myself.
That was great. Thank you for that. Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, I think we've gone a little bit beyond my question now, but I'll still ask it anyway. First of all, I'd like
Yeah.
to say when I did meet Fed, I think, we have that pump pusher thing where we say 3 words to describe somebody, right? It was like introverted was definitely in there. Like calm and focused was what I like felt from Fed, like from the first meeting and then also subsequent meetings. Very consistent. But my question was, you were born Chinese, but born in the Philippines, and you were bringing Diesel at the time into China. But did you speak Chinese? And so if you didn't, like, what was it like to actually execute that?
Well, languages have never been my strong suit. So, for example, I've lived in Hong Kong now for nearly 20 years, and I still can't speak Cantonese that well. Okay. So, just to set that context. So, I've lived in Hong Kong longer than I've lived anywhere else in my entire life. And Cantonese, I still suck at Cantonese. However, my mother is actually from Shanghai. So she, in a way, and she spoke to us in Mandarin. Okay. So in a way, let's say having a conversation with somebody in Mandarin wasn't really so foreign to me, just because my mother spoke it. But the only challenge was I couldn't really say much back. So in a way, I did sort of like learn. I picked up a bit, and my Mandarin got better over the years. I wouldn't say it's still great, but it's gotten better over the years. And I think I guess it's testament to, like, even for me, like living and surviving in Hong Kong for this long, without being well versed in Cantonese. I guess there is a skill set, or I guess my own skill set, where I think I can just kind of like figure out a way to communicate with people.
Okay. All right. I have a follow-on question as well from what you answered about the entrepreneurship thing. So I always find that very interesting. You said a lot of people didn't really understand your decision at the time. You had the mortgage, you had a kid on the way, you were doing really well with Diesel. But what did you recognize within yourself that made you want to do that and leave Diesel that other people didn't see?
Well, I guess I just felt like, one of the, before this call, one of the questions Jacqueline did ask was sort of like, I always told her I'm usually, when I do things, I like to make sure I do my research. Usually it's a bit more considered. And then she did ask, did I ever do anything kind of like spontaneously? I'd say jumping into the entrepreneurial game was a bit of a spontaneous decision for me. Half spontaneous, half researched. When I say it was half research, it's not like I read up and what it meant to be like an entrepreneur. I actually, towards the tail end of my tenure at Diesel, I did sort of like, I moonlighted, and I did some sort of like freelance projects on the side, where I tried my hand at what it meant to kind of like do projects for other people instead of just like the one company I work for. And in a way, that was my first taste of entrepreneurship, where, I had to, let's say, put myself in a situation where I wasn't the client anymore, where I actually had a client and I had a service to provide, and what it meant to like do a proper contract, what it meant to kind of like, scope out a project correctly, and then also kind of deliver on your, let's say, obligations. And then, in the way, also kind of be rewarded for it, monetarily for your services. And so I did that actually, let's say 2 to 3 times. And I'm like, hey, I think I could do this. And then kind of like spontaneously, I'm like, okay, let's start an agency. And that's the one thing I didn't know really what that meant. Okay. What that meant, when you basically have your own thing, is basically, you have to, if nobody else will do it, you have to take the trash off yourself too. Right. Because when you work for a big company, right, you kind of neglect a lot of these things, where somebody actually opened the office for you. Somebody kind of set up everything for you, where you had an IT department who would actually, let's say fix your laptop. As an entrepreneur, you're like, oh, let me go buy a laptop. How much does that cost? Oh, I need a server. Oh, you need to hire a cleaning lady for your office. And if the cleaning lady doesn't show up, I'm like, okay, who's going to clean up at the end of the day? Right. So there's a lot of these.
Would you say you said those 2-year period of like adjusting to be an entrepreneur? Would you say these little things were the things that were the biggest challenge?
Oh, 100%. Definitely those little things were the biggest challenge. And also the biggest challenge, which I still have to this day, is also HR, right? When you're having to build a team, having to motivate a team, having to also be conscious of what your colleagues and team members are going through in their own personal lives, making sure that also the work they're doing is fulfilling for them. That's been sort of like, I would say, the biggest learning thing for me. And I'm still learning up to this day about it. Managing people.
See, when we first were calling, right, I wouldn't have guessed that you were an introvert. I don't know why, but now, like, listening to your story, and we kind of went more in depth, I get it now. And like Daniel Long and I were both we're all introverts. What did we call it? Like social introverts, or how do we call it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. Social introverts.
Yeah, social introverts. Yeah. So
I would say though, a lot of people wouldn't know that about me, and I'd say, I don't know, don't want to speak for Long, but I would assume it would be the same for her, and even you, Jack, maybe, right?
Yeah,
because we do
I
this
would say
podcast,
so.
and I think most people know us through the podcast, and they hear us, and they think, oh, they're so happy-go-lucky, all this kind of stuff. But privately, we know, right?
Yeah, and we know because and we respect each other's spaces and give each other time. The dynamic is very
when Fed
neutral.
goes like, oh, the weekend, and I could just switch off and just not see anybody, I'm like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's move on. I have oh man, I have so many more topics, but I feel like we're running out of time. Okay, so like the next question I want to talk about is let's quickly talk about like the digital space right now, because I think that's one of the main topics Fed and I discussed yesterday. And the question is, how do you think Fed has the world changed for both, art and fashion industry as the society has moved towards the digital space? So like one example would be, I know you've done projects with Stockx. Like, how have these platforms changed the dynamic for the better or for the worse for how consumers consume both art and fashion?
Right. I mean, I would say, like, let's say, especially the last 5-6 years, it's interesting because like e-commerce, right? We're talking about, it's interesting to think like when people talk about e-commerce or online commerce or online marketplaces, that it's sort of like still this like new disruptive thing, right? In a way, like if you talk about, let's say, Stockx, right? It's sort of like, it only kind of came into the scene, I would say, more strongly in the last 3 years, correct? It never really existed before. But what's interesting thing here is that it's not like it was a new invention, because I mean, let's not forget, eBay was kind of like the first proponent of these marketplaces, right? And when everybody was like, oh my God, let's get on eBay, or you can have all these finds on eBay, right? I think what happened with places like Stockx is, I think in the last, let's say, 5 years, I'd say that also from a technology standpoint, it's just like eventually technology finally caught up with a lot of people's crazy ideas. Right now, where it's like, everybody has an app. Obviously now we have 5G connection, and everything is very heavily on mobile, right? So I think all those, let's say, things from being kind of like, very, now everybody's very mobile device heavy, with obviously kind of like, I guess like mobile speed or like connectivity speed, kind of like being so fast now. then of
Yeah.
course it's much easier also for these let's say technologies to adapt. But I think, let's say with regards, let's say Stockx, it's just sort of like it's done something where um, I think it's kind of really created this idea of sort of like buying and selling in a more efficient manner. And of course, starting off with the sneaker community was interesting, right? Because who would have thought that your passion,
Yeah.
let's say your childhood passion of a sneaker collector, could actually end up becoming something, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought that? Same, like not to try to pour salt to your wound, Jacqueline. Who would have thought SB Dunk Paris versions would cost over what I think 15-20,000 US dollars.
Yeah.
Which is essentially and not to like pour more salt to your wound, which would actually be you know, if you did sell it, would
Oof.
be equivalent to having some budget to purchase a nice watch.
I
Yeah.
think he just put the Himalayan salt in there.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
it's interesting. So I think like StockX as a platform, I would say, sort of like really figured something else out. And I think also as a seller, right, when you have these things you've collected, and now you have a platform to like openly sell your items and even understand and like openly what the market price is for something like that is interesting, right? Because I
Yeah.
think maybe a couple of years ago, you wouldn't even know what a market price is. Like there's no
Yeah.
standard.
Yeah.
You know, so one guy would tell you like, yeah, I'll pay you $2,000 for your SB Dunks. Another guy would say 5,000, and you're
Yeah.
like, so what exactly is the price?
Yeah.
And I think StockX has been really good at creating a platform or a system for people to kind of easily be knowledgeable in terms of like, okay, this is like a fair value for something.
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's created an equilibrium. Before it was, you know, best offers on eBay, or you would check out Flight Club and see what their listing price is. But then StockX now has made the information a lot more public and accessible. And I think, I mean, I remember what you said yesterday, right? You were saying how convenience is a big part into like consumerism and whatever. Like I think the example you raised was it takes 2 days to ship something from Net-a-Porter to Hong Kong versus something else also takes like the equal time. I think StockX with their chain of logistics and also their authentication process for, I mean, like, what are they doing now? Like, they're doing sneakers, they're doing art, they're doing watches, jewelry, bags, they're doing everything. So their chain is very well organized.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, the critical element, like you point out with StockX, is the authentication platform, right? So what they've been doing, especially in recent years, is like really building out all the authentication centers they have globally. Because when they're able to authenticate, then at least they know that their customers are always getting the right product, right? Or like the real deal. But also at the same time, by them having all these authentication centers, they can ship your product out faster, right? Because there's that middle layer where like, okay, I'm gonna sell my sneaker, but I gotta send it to StockX first to kind of check. So that's kind of like the layer that usually slows it down. But then by doing more centers, they can make the process faster. And then you're right, now it's a big category diversification where you know, now they're also getting into collectibles. You know, I wouldn't say it's still like I would say the
best
fine
place.
art angle,
Yeah.
right? But in terms of collectibles, it's there, right? Like obviously they're doing a brisk trade in bear bricks.
Yep.
And then they've got like, you know, obviously other kind of artist figures, like from let's say a Daniel Arsham or like a Cause,
BFFs,
for example, or BFs, you know. So I
I
would say
bought-
like it's
I bought a Pinocchio from StockX. I was like taking a risk to buying the Pinocchio, but then like they authenticated it and then they even gave me like a certificate. So like that was like, I think that was my first purchase on StockX, and back then like the Pinocchio wasn't that expensive. Now it's like pretty pricey now. But yeah, I've bought from StockX, I've sold with StockX, and generally the customer feedback, the experience, like you said, which is important, is generally very good. Like I used to say if I'm unemployed, like I would be happy to just authenticate sneakers for them. Like I would be happy to do that. Yeah. Oh, Daniel, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I got a question, which was Jacqueline obviously did the sneakers first and then eventually got into watches, right? Do you think that there are a lot of similarities in the mentality of the consumer that chase these sneakers to people that actually like watches? So do you reckon that it's an easy crossover to move into watches?
Is that for me or
That's
for
for Fed. That's for Fed.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we talk about that all the time. So we feel not just necessarily the sneaker game, but I think a lot of the people who were really into the whole street culture game, right? In terms of like they collected sneakers, they collected street fashion. You know, they were kind of like into sort of like getting those grail items from, let's say, a Supreme, for example. A lot of those guys, I would say, or girls, you know, guys and girls who basically migrated or beginning to migrate into the watch game too. I think what it is sort of like, I think in terms of like the street fashion scene, and also the sneaker game, I think back in the, I don't want to say back in the day. I mean, it feels like so like long time ago, but I think one is sort of like there was a degree of like inaccessibility to these brands or items before, right? Even when you were collecting sneakers, Jacqueline, right? You had to go on like trading platform or like trading, like say sneaker blogs or like sneaker
mostly
platforms to
forums,
kind of
Soul
find
Collector.
forums.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, Soul Collector. But there was this idea like it's inaccessible, it's hard to get, right? And that's sort of like the thrill of the chase, I think made it even more exciting for people, right? But I think these days the thrill of the chase is a bit waning, also mainly because like you have platforms like StockX, right? I mean, it's sort of like, of course, the price has become a lot more expensive, but technically you can almost find any pair of Grail sneaker you want on the platform, right? If it's not in StockX, you're gonna go somewhere else. You can go find it, right? It's exactly. It's a bit more commoditized, a bit more accessible. I think, and that sort of like mindset, I think, attracted people for watches as well.
For sure.
Because in a way, and the watches is sort of like, then it's a whole nother ball game, right? You're like, oh, okay, so so how do you get on a wait list for a brand? How do you build your reputation? You know, how do you get the right access, right? And then sort of like, how do you even choose like the next one, right? Like, what's the next brand people are gonna like be into, you know? And it's the same. It's sort of like you keep buying Rolexes, right? Where everybody has a Rolex, but then somehow the brand always comes up with something that people are gonna want again. So yeah, definitely, I would say it's a lot of the people who is really into the whole street fashion, sneaker collecting have migrated to watch collecting as well.
And we'll talk about the joy of hunting for watches in the second part of this interview. But I just want to wrap up this first part with my last two questions. Let's talk about collaborations for a little bit, because I think that has been a really hot topic in the art and fashion industry for the last couple of years. And my first question is, we've seen a lot of these collabs popping up between artists and brands, and most of them have been quite successful. But what's your genuine take on artists and brand collaborations? And I'll give you like a few choices. Like, first, a lot of people are saying, okay, they're just a recipe for success, but it could also be easily exploited because most people will just buy out the limited editions, and that's how most brands make money. So in your opinion, what makes a good collaboration, and where do you think the idea of brand and artist collaborations is gonna go in the future?
Regarding brand and artist collaborations, it's actually been around for a while. A lot of people have done it for quite some time. And if you look at the history of fashion, it's something that's always been resonated into that ecosystem, right? Fashion designers always find, let's say, in some way, even let's say a lot of fashion designers from, let's say, even the greats like Yohji Yamamoto or like Ray Kawakubo from Comme des Garçons, right? Or even Karl Lagerfeld. They've always been inspired by the art world, right? They've let's say often reference, let's say, an artist that they like, whether they become sort of like a muse for them, or like they reference some of their art pieces that kind of like maybe the colors that they're using that's translated into a collection. I think what's happened now these days in fashion and art, it's just like we're also in a way of like I want to I'm just coming up with this term right now, but I think we're also in an era of hyper marketing, right? where I think, and this is sort of like a result of, let's say, social media as well, where like
Mhm.
every day now you're just kind of inundated with like tons of new stuff that people are trying to plug. Like you just can't avoid
Yeah.
it. The moment you wake up, somebody's promoting something, right?
Yeah.
And then if we talk about, let's say, even this idea of, let's say, sneaker collecting, sneaker culture, every week or maybe every other day, there's a new sneaker drop,
Yeah.
right? And even this idea of drop culture, right? We never used to talk about drops back in the day, but now it's like everywhere. Someone's dropping something all the time. So I think right now it's just become more obvious in terms of these collaborations. And I think most people who feel like they want to, let's say, get out there and get their get more recognized, they feel like, hey, I need to find a collaboration with a really popular artist that everybody knows, or an influencer who's so well known that if I collaborate with them, will get my brand more recognized in other market or in this particular market.
Mhm.
So I think that in a way, is that a recipe for success? I wouldn't say it's a guarantee for success, but I would say it's a good tool to obviously get a wider or bigger brand recognition if you do it right.
Yeah.
Okay. And now how do you do it right? Honestly, the best way to do it is do it organically, right? Because essentially a lot of these collaborations are sparked from simple meetings, right? Where maybe there's an occasion where, let's say, for example, a fashion designer goes to a particular place, or maybe they go to a music festival, and then that music festival they end up bumping into an artist that they've always liked or been inspired by, and then they started clicking, and they just realized like, oh, I like your brand too. I buy your clothes, and then the designer will be like, oh, I've always been inspired by your work, and then from there's like a natural story, right? Because
Yeah.
eventually the reason why you also have a collaboration, it's also a content tool for the brand, right? Then they start telling a new story as to how this collaboration came about. And if the story is not naturally convincing, then of course, then people, I mean, a lot of people, people catch on to things much faster these days. So your
Yeah.
story needs to be convincing in order for people to buy into your collab.
For sure. I think Kim Jones have been doing a pretty decent job
Well,
with his
yeah,
selections. Yeah.
100%. I mean, Kim, first, I think Kim, he's such a well-rounded guy. And I think he really has a deep appreciation for the culture, both in fashion and
In
art, but
art,
also
yeah.
in music, in street fashion. And I think he just sort of like has to sort of like natural, I guess, sense to kind of pick up on like, okay, this feels right. Let me work with this person.
Mhm.
But also at the same time, he's also a very talented fashion designer, and he really
Yeah.
knows about product. And I think because he's very good with product, then the people who collaborate with him feel very comfortable working with him too.
Mhm. For sure. For sure. Okay, so my last question before we move on to the reversal round is let's bring it all the way back to what you do, which is marketing and communication and storytelling. If you were to just give a really quick elevator pitch to someone who doesn't know the importance of storytelling, how would you describe what you do and how you are able to aid these brands in reaching a certain demographic or accomplishing a certain goal?
Um,
Basically, like, how does one successfully tell the story for a brand?
sure. So in the space, let's say I'm in, or let's say we're all of us, even us, right? Like for example, we're on this podcast or we're on this call mainly because we all have a general, let's say, liking or appreciation or affinity to, let's say, watch collecting, right? But if you really think about it, do we all essentially need another watch, right?
Mhm.
Or do we even essentially need another pair of sneakers? Or do we need to buy more stuff? The answer is technically no,
Mhm.
right? But we all have an emotional connection to the stuff we aspire to want and own and keep, right? And a lot of that has to do with the stories that people are telling you about these things, right? And and that's why I'm saying like the storytelling is really important for brands in any category, you know. It's because like then that story then, let's say, creates a sort of like emotional connection with your consumer. Let's say it infiltrates, let's say, the psyche of the consumer and like tells them why they're gonna want or need to own your item, right? It doesn't even have to necessarily be fashion or watches. Like even let's say a household product, right? If somebody tells you like, oh, you should buy this particular cleaning product because it's sort of like it's like sustainable, it's biodegradable, but at the same time, it's going to kill 99% of the germs. Oh, and by the way, it also looks good in your house, right? It's the packaging is aesthetically pleasing, and they're like, okay, sold. Oh, by the way, we're going to charge you a 50% premium for this item. Like, oh yeah, it's worth the cost, you know. So yeah, you have to tell the right story in order to just justify all these elements you're trying to sell to a consumer, right? You know, or like, you know, or you could, anyway, also let's say the story that people kind of create about like something being extremely limited, right? You know, like for example, yesterday, Jacqueline, we spoke about like how, you know, they've never officially said how many pieces that they produce, right? But we did say like Rolex produces over 1 million pieces of watches a year. But at the same time, you're like, well, if they make over 1 million pieces of watches a year, why is it so difficult to get a Daytona, right? You know, why is it like almost like seemingly impossible to get one, right? So in a way, you know, there are kind of like people, in the way, I mean, Rolex never officially communicated these things. They never say that a Daytona is limited or it's difficult to buy, but they've also allowed their community to tell their stories on their behalf, where the community is like, oh, how come, this date, like this particular Daytona model is a bit more special because like, you know, the dial is white, but because it's a white dial references to a panda. And, you know, I heard like Hong Kong's only getting like 50 of these, you know, you better get on it now, you know, but these have never been substantiated by the brand. But at the same time, like the brand in the way probably had a hand in like articulating this to let's say that core community of watch collectors. And then these watch collectors communicated on behalf of the brand. So I would say like if I were to, let's say, advise any brand, you know, who would like to, you know, do something, I would say, yeah, tell the right story. Okay.
And tell it to the right group of people.
The right group of people, but not just the right group of people, but the right group of people who could be, let's say, community, who'd be kind of like in a way your ambassadors, kind of like a good community to surround yourself in, who would, let's say, tell the story on your behalf and make it even more believable.
Yeah. So basically tell a good story and then tell it to a core group of people who can better voice that story to other more like-minded people who might like your product.
That's correct. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I did, but Fed kind of like answered it as he was going along. Like I was going to say, because he said like you need a story. So my question was, what makes a good story? And it sounds like what I'm picking up from Fed, if I just summarize, is it needs to be genuine.
Yeah.
And then it needs to be layered with potentially a limited thing, but not actually told it was limited. And then getting into the core group of people that are into this stuff so that they then spread myth or like half truths into the wider community, right?
Not even myths. I think it's just like there's a certain degree of power for when a brand puts forward a message, and there is the power is greater when the public is resonating with it and then just reflecting that to other people. Like, well,
I think it's strong if you have like an official message and then a non-official message, you know, which like kind of goes underground and is like a myth. Well, not information that if you knew, right? Like you should know this if you're really into it. And then you've obviously got the basic information about the product. So still like exclusivity and feeling like belonging to like a club, right? Like if you know that type. Yeah. Would you say that's right, Fed? Would you say that's about right?
For the most part, very, very well summarized. But I think ultimately the story has to, like you said, it has to be genuine, but you also have to be in a way creative about it, right? You have to come up with a unique angle, and in a way you also have to figure out the right timing when you communicate such things, right? And if you tell me what's the best timing for anything, I mean, nobody can tell you that. You just kind of have to instinctively feel your way out, like feel your way into figuring out what the right moment is to communicate something. But you know, obviously, I mean, like you said, like people then would use words like, "Oh, this is exclusive or limited edition." I mean, yes, those are, let's say, in a way, marketing jargons that are really that resonate well with people. Like everybody wants something limited edition, right? You know, but then the question is like, limited edition of what, right?
Yeah.
You know, because limited edition is just a term, and to some people, oh yeah, 100,000 pairs is limited edition, but you know, but I guess it's also depends on the demand. If like 1 million people want it, right, then yeah, 100,000 pieces is limited edition, essentially.
Or it's like Rolex, it's limited to 1 million a year.
Well, correct, but at the same time, Rolex, you still want it, right? They've created this such a strong brand, this
desire.
power, this desire, like I want
success
it,
story.
But why don't they just not deliberately market it? Because the most genuine way is if the right people who like the thing will naturally buy it and then just wear it, and then it's just a very natural process instead of being like, let's kind of like implant these people into communities and stuff.
I guess in a way that's sort of like how they're engaging, right? That's how they kind of draw you in. You know what I mean? Like if they just kind of like, I guess if they let out the secret sauce, you're like, oh, okay, I know it now. You're not so interesting anymore. You know what I mean? So if you that sense of mystery and, you know, that idea, like, I don't know when I'm gonna get it, makes people keep wanting it.
Yeah,
right?
that surprise factor, the unknown. Yeah.
I mean, you should know this pretty well. Like with AP, right? AP says, we've taken your interest. And you know, we'll let you know if we can fulfill it, but they'll never tell you when. And you know, and you've always heard that, like, people always say, like, what is your biggest thrill in getting a watch? And I've heard a bunch of people just say the biggest thrill is getting that phone call. It's not even putting the watch on your wrist, right?
That's really true.
It's like something that's out of your control, so you're thinking about it every day until you finally get the phone call. So it's like kind of getting the stamp of approval. Okay, I approve of you. You can get this now, and that's like the climax of the story. And then the rest.
I think you nailed it there. Like, just exactly. The element of control, because it's so out of your control.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to the reversal round. Fed, do you have any questions that you can ask? One for each of us.
One for each of you. Okay.
Yeah.
Long, why didn't you tell me you were back in Hong Kong? I'm just kidding.
I was, finding the perfect outfit. I'm not there yet.
Oh, great. Okay, cool.
I was thinking, Fed, like, you got burned on this before the call, and I was like, you want to make this public now and get burned publicly? like priorities, Fed.
Watch her go meet you in her boxing outfit.
It's also because your surname begins with Tan. Like, it's further down the list.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, that's a good answer, actually. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Oh, because just further down the list, I'm like, okay, cool. All right, fine. I'll take that. Sure. Let me kind of ask. Okay. So Daniel, actually, I've always kind of been curious. Why did you start this waiting list podcast, and why is it called Waiting List to begin with?
It's called The Waiting List because it was during COVID, right? And this podcast didn't start, until I was in Hong Kong, and I was with a couple of friends, Long, one of them, and we were talking about the waiting list in a lobby in a hotel. At that time, everything was getting under lockdown, and everything was shutting really early, and we were just getting like push pillar to post, looking for a place to sit and just chill out. And when you're with 4 watch people, you end up talking about watches. And that particular topic at the time was the waiting list. We were talking about the waiting list, exactly similar to the topics what we discussed earlier, actually. And we were saying, oh, would anybody like to be a fly on the wall and listen to some of these home truths about, wait, as you mentioned, Long Long's very familiar with actually what goes on. And there's a bunch of people that talk about it as though they know what's going on, but they don't. So we were like thinking, would anybody be interested in listening it? Let's put it on and see. And then it kind of just morphed into like, we never planned on it being heavily interview based like it is now, but it just ended up being like that because we thought it's a lot interesting for us personally when we have somebody on the interview where we can actually talk to them and learn something that we didn't know. And a lot of the podcasts out there, it's mainly 2-3 people. I mean, it's mostly 2 people that just talk between themselves, and there's no external person there, and it keeps it really fresh, I think, from our side. So that's how it started, and that's why it's called The Waiting List.
Oh, cool. That's a nice story, you see?
Yeah.
Exactly. So when you communicate that story, then people will understand, oh, that's what this podcast is for. And I think you guys, and I think also you've had a consistent, I guess, vision or process to it. And that's why you're 70 podcasts deep already. And actually, I didn't even realize you already had 70 podcasts. So, I mean, good on you guys, because I know it's a lot of work.
Yeah, thanks for keeping up.
Yeah.
Oh, no, thank you. Exactly. There you go.
Yeah.
And then Jacqueline, I want to ask you, this is sort of like what intrigued me. Because you obviously said that you're in your early 20s. Why would somebody in their early 20s be, let's say, enamored or be into collecting watches now, when also it's an expensive hobby if you think about it, right? It's a very, very different game to sneaker collecting, because I guess, like, in a way, for sneaker collecting, right, you can buy a pair of sneakers, let's say $500 US, and if you want to trade it, you're like, okay, I'm cool to like sometimes you can just take a loss, right? Like, if I want to trade it, I'll trade it for like 400, that's fine, right? But watches is a totally different price category.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, like, most people just make wrong assumptions about people who collect watches, and just think like, oh, this person must be loaded, right?
Yeah.
And I keep saying, like, you can't assume that, right? Because sometimes you just know how to trade, right? You would buy one watch, the price goes up, you trade it for something,
Yeah.
I mean, there's that trading ecosystem as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what got you into this, and why are you enamored by it?
Yeah. Okay. So how I got into watches, it was I was looking for a birthday present for my mom. And I knew nothing about watches then. I had a little bit of money to spend, and also my dad had portioned in his half. So we had come into a conclusion that we're gonna, come together and get something nice for my mom's birthday. And it was kind of up to me to decide what is the best way to spend this amount of money. And it was about 50,000 at a time. It was like, I've never spent that much money on anything, even though it wasn't for me, but like, just spent the idea of buying something with 50,000 is like scary to me. So I was doing research for about 1 month at a time, and I finally decided on what was gonna be the gift for her, and pulled the trigger, did that, and by the time that I had gotten to that point, because I was reading so much, and my personality is like, not to make fun of Ben Clymer, but there's a meme on the internet, him saying in an interview or something, like, me, like, when I go deep, I go fucking deep. I think that was his quote unquote. And then people are making a meme out of him. But I think I am similar. So like, if I were to really get into something, I can like not sleep, I don't have to eat, I'm into it. So that was the same thing with sneakers, that was the same thing with watches. So I was introduced to it through my mom, tangentially, like buying a gift for my mom, but then ended up being deep into the rabbit hole. In terms of why I'm enamored with it, it goes back to like my personality a little bit. I just like collecting in general. I never throw away stuff. That's why there's so much trash in my house. Like I like associating feelings and memories with watches, which is ironic because once I started this hobby, I until now I haven't been able to associate much memory with watches because of COVID, right? Normally I would, take my cameras out and take photos, and that's how I associate memories with my camera. And with watches and being under, lockdown, I haven't been able to do that until quite recently when travel restrictions are lifted a little bit. So that's something I'm looking forward to in the future. And in terms of the trading up culture and buying watches, you're absolutely right. Like to most people and to actually a lot of my friends, whenever I talk about watches and I don't tell them how much it is because it is crazy. Like I think we can all agree that this is a crazy thing. But then for me is like, I started making a little bit money through sneakers. Again, that was how I learned my English, and I was able to make money through trading and buying and selling. And then I started doing that when I got into college with Stockx. And then it's just something that I really enjoy now, because unlike sneakers or unlike Stockx, watches, again, you can bond over it, you can accessorize it with different straps. And what I really love, and we'll talk about this right after this part one, is the trading up culture. So actually a lot of the watches that I've bought are no longer with me because I've just been bundling them up to trade for something else. And in my mind, even though I didn't make money off of it because I didn't liquidate it, I don't count as making money unless you sell something, right? But because I got something at a certain price and now the market has kind of inflated, I can use that watch that I bought for $10,000 to trade for something that is worth $20,000. In my mind, it's like naively, it's like, okay, buying a $20,000 thing with $10,000. So it's like the trading up idea, right? And not just that, it's more about the challenge. It's about, again, the unknown factor, about you have your eyes set on this watch. You don't know if, first of all, the collector or the seller is going to vibe with you. You don't know if the deal is going to pull through. And you know what? When it is pulling through, you're never certain until that watch is in your hands, right? I remember, and just to sum this question up, remembering watching an interview with Aura Montanaro, John Goldberger, and he was talking about a 3449, which is one of three, a perpetual calendar that made by Patek. He was trading it with a Yachtmaster Paul Newman. It was a prototype dial. And I remember in the interview with Waco, he said, I am not big on possession. I am big on the story. So what was fun for me was approaching the dealer. They met at a villa. It was a one-to-one trade. And by the time I had the watch in my hand and I put it on my wrist, the story was over. So for me, I resonate with that a lot, because it's the unknown. It's the feeling, it's the tense nervousness of knowing or not knowing if this is going to work out. And then it's the joy when it finally works out that you're able to trade 2, 3, 4, 5 watches for that one grail worthy piece. So that's where I think is the fun resides most within. That's how I approach it. Yeah.
Nice. Very well put. And I'm going to send you a picture of my office, and I will depict your future if you never decide to throw anything out.
Okay. I'll give you a call.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
And then Long, I'm gonna go on a deep end here, because we're talking about going deep into something. Not about watches, since you're in finance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so obviously, I think the hot topic for 2021 is how all these crypto billionaires are emerging, how this whole world of NFTs and people paying crazy prices for an NFT art. I mean, what's your take on the crypto space? You think it's here to stay? And then do you think it's had an effect into the increase of prices of the secondary market? for watches, that is.
It's actually really ironic that recently a lot of people have been talking about NFTs, like we've been pitched to make one and so on. But again, like I think this whole I think all this terminology gets really I I think it confuses people, but at the end of the day, right, you're still trading an item, whether it be physical or not. You're just trading you're just trading an item, right? And a lot of trading items comes down to a story, like you said, a good story. And for me, NFT is another item that needs a lot of marketing and a good story, just like even with equities, with anything, you know? In terms of crypto, I think the technology like Ethereum and blockchain, right? Specifically, blockchain is 100% here to stay.
Yeah.
Like I'm a huge believer in it. Even if I don't understand it, I understand like you have to understand it because it's going to be incorporated into every industry. Whether crypto will be accepted, I think it takes a while, but yeah, it definitely will be used as a currency. Probably not I wouldn't even say in the next 5 years. I'm even thinking like 7 to 10 years before people are comfortable with it. And I think a lot of it comes down to culture. I think when you introduce something new to countries like, say, China, right, where people are very open to trying new things and learn, and they constantly have that drive to learn, people can accept change. Whereas I would say a country like, I
The
guess
whole of Europe.
Yeah, I want to say Europe, right?
Yeah.
Switzerland.
Yeah, basically places where people are scared of change because they're afraid. They just reject things. So I do see it being adopted really quickly in Asia, specifically China.
Cool. And
Yeah.
do you think this has had an effect on the increase in watch prices? Do you think the crypto guys are also, let's say, influencing? I mean, let's look at it, right? Like, who would have thought a 5711, a PP 5711 would end up becoming 100 grand when it was 50,000? Everybody's already saying this is nuts.
I was actually thinking about this yesterday. There's this term called Veblen goods, which is basically, yeah, so you're familiar, right? So like expensive items that are limited in limited production. I think across the board, bags, shoes, watches, with these kind of goods, and you're always going to have this. And me and Jacqueline, before any of you got into the room, we're just saying that we're at this point now in the market where it's hit its peak. So we're saying this coming season, you see the craziest watches, right? So I think the secondary watch market, what we're seeing now, is basically like these Veblen goods hitting the top prices already, but it has nothing to do with crypto coming into our lives and everything. I think that's a separate thing.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. But I always think, sorry, Jacqueline. I always think whenever there's new technology or new things that people don't understand, there's always a gap, like 6 months to a year, for the people who aren't afraid to cash in and make money before the rest of the world catches up and goes, okay, I get this now.
Cool.
Jacqueline?
Okay. Yeah, I think that was the reversal round, and then we'll quickly go into 10 quick fires, and then that's the end of part 1. So are you ready, Fed?
Sure.
Okay. Most recent art exhibition you saw?
Libe at Gallery Periton.
Okay. I don't know what that is, but you can send it to me later and for us to learn.
All right.
Favorite museum?
Tate Modern.
Yes. Most memorable artist you've worked with?
Takashi Murakami.
Nice. One up and coming artist everyone should know about.
One up and coming artist that everyone should know about. There is too many. We'll have to come back to this one.
Okay, no problem. Sneakers or clothing?
Sneakers, mainly because there's an investment possibility for it.
Okay, interesting. Next question, sneakers or watches?
Watches, by far.
Okay.
Is it for the same reason? Sorry.
Probably.
Because of the investment side.
No, Actually, no. Firstly, not necessarily because of the investment part. I do think that, like, say, watches. I mean, there's an artistry to it. There's a technical expertise to it, and and it's also, there's like something about a watch that you can look at your wrist and kind of admire. I don't think you would look at your feet all the time too, right? So,
Yeah.
So I choose watches over sneakers any day.
Yeah, I agree, to be honest.
Jacqueline might, sleeping with them.
No.
She probably sleeps with her watches too. You didn't ask that. And she showers with her watches too. So.
I try. Okay, someone with great taste that we would be surprised about.
Someone with
Okay,
great taste
let me
in what?
rephrase that. Like someone, like, say, like a celebrity that we might know, with great taste in like either clothing or watches that we would be surprised about.
So would they be wearing the nice stuff in private, like at home?
Yeah, well, a lot of artists, like, they're big collectors, right? But they don't show.
But they have to be like well-known people, right?
Yeah, that we would probably know, but it would be like a surprise to know. Like, Ed Sheeran.
That's a very demanding question.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Has to be this, has to be that, has to be this.
Okay, we can skip that. That was just for my own curiosity.
Be famous, but not too famous because we can't know him.
Okay, we can skip that. That was just to fulfill my own curiosity. I'll text you privately.
Okay, sure.
Most cherished life advice you've received and live by.
The most life. How about this? Let me maybe I split into two. Let's say my most cherished professional advice, specifically in the area of what I do, okay, in marketing, communications, and PR. It's always going to go back to with my mentor when I worked at Diesel. Her name was Antonella Vieiro, who actually lives in Shanghai, Daniel. The two bits of advice she gave me that have resonated with me over the last, more than a decade already, is she said, learn to smile and have thick skin. I think those two traits would have allowed me to, let's say, be and survive and, let's say, grow in this industry I'm in. I guess life advice, it was interesting. Life advice, I had a very difficult, there was a point in my life in my early 20s that I had a very, very difficult moment. And what I did was I basically poured myself into work. So it still happens a lot now where I actually, I guess in a way people think I'm a bit of a workaholic, where I guess from Monday to Friday, I'm just sort of like just working, and I could be reached at any hours, any time of the day, and I'll do as much as I can. And maybe even to my detriment, because I do think that there are 25 hours to the day, which, let's say I'm over ambitious with my time, and which is why maybe sometimes some of you guys have seen people refer to something called Fed time, which is like why sometimes I'm often late for a lot of things. But it's not because I'm intending to be late, but it's just because I'm over ambitious with my time. A bit of a life advice I had before was like, sometimes, I found myself in a situation where I worked a lot, and I would sometimes work till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And then the next day, sometimes I'd like to tell, let's say at that point in my early 20s, I want to tell my colleagues or bosses, like, yeah, I was in the office till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And to make people think like I worked really hard. And then one day, one like guy, I didn't work with him directly, but he was sort of like a senior guy in the office, kind of pulled me in the side and said, hey, I hope you understand that nobody really cares that you work till that late, because nobody asked you to. Right. And that, in a way, that kind of like term sort of like saying that to me was sort of like, what the message I got from that wasn't about like I didn't need to work late, but with the message I got there, it's like, if I decided to do something or work hard at something, you better make sure you're doing it for yourself, not because you think that's what other people expect from you.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
Right. So I think that if you decide that you're gonna go deep into something and, like, dedicate your time, make sure that's something you want to do yourself. Don't think you're doing it because your boss or your friends or colleagues, your peers expect you to do that. Okay, because in the end, nobody's going to appreciate it or recognize you for it, except yourself.
Amen. RT that. Yeah.
I have got the best excuse next time I'm going to be late.
I'm ambitious about my time.
Sounds so much better. Like,
yeah.
What a line. What a line. Right?
I love it.
I'm
yeah.
sorry I'm late, but I found I was over ambitious with my time today. Like, suddenly, what a spin. What a story.
No, you gotta say, you just gotta live on Fed time. You can't live on normal time. It has to be Fed time. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, you could say that too. It might not work though, but yeah, you can try.
Okay, be over ambitious then. Okay, 2 more questions. Where would you like to visit first once travel restrictions are lifted?
It's either gonna be Shanghai or Tokyo.
Yeah. I knew you were gonna say probably Tokyo. Same. That's like where I want to go to. And then last question. This is purely selfishly for me. Like, if you were to get one tattoo, what would it be and where would you get it?
Oh, if I were to get one tattoo, what would it be? Where would I get it?
Yep.
I would get 2 tattoos. I would get it from Dr. Wu, of course, and also Scott Campbell. And I would probably put 2 tattoos in both arms. Okay. And I guess I would symbolically probably have a symbol to reference a relationship with my family, to my wife and daughter. That's what I would do. That's actually been in my mind. And it's funny because, like, let's say Scott Campbell, I actually first he's an artist as well, and he did this really interesting dollar cut series, like laser cut series of dollar bills, about like maybe 10 years ago. And I'm in possession of one, and it's one of my favorite art pieces. And I've always thought that his technique as a tattoo artist was amazing. And then some years ago, I had the chance to become friends with him. And it's the same thing when you talked about sort of like, John Goldberger was saying that, once you put the wrist on the watch on your wrist, the story's over. And I guess in my mind, I just felt like, oh, it'd be super awesome to finally one day have a tattoo by Scott Campbell. And then after a while, then you meet sort of like the people you aspire to meet. You meet them, you become friends with them. And I'm like, actually, I just wanted to meet the guy, but I don't really need to have a tattoo anymore.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Dr. Wu. And I kept, every time I see him, like, hey, Wu, should I get a tattoo from you now? And he goes, are you sure you're ready?
Yes.
And then Wu did tell me one day, it's like, honestly, everybody's got a tattoo now. Maybe it's cooler if you just didn't have one.
Yeah.
Right. As a cop out, and just to say, like, I had like a Dr. Wu something. I did have Dr. Wu kind of do a hand illustration, one of my jackets. So that was kind of neat. So he did that for me. So cool. Yeah, I gave him a military jacket I had. He added spider webs, palm trees, some of his sort of like circular lines. So that was neat.
For Dr. Wu and Scott Campbell, I'm willing to give my virgin forearm to them. I have like, I'm willing to give my forearm because.
What about your forehead? And just your face.
Maybe not forehead.
Real estate there.
Yeah, maybe not forehead or face, but yeah, I'm willing to give my forearms. And I mean, like, while we're talking about Scott Campbell, like, I remember just watching his video. Like, he built a tattoo gun out of like dollar store equipment, and then he was tattooing in Central Park. Oh, so sick. And then his glory hole exhibition. Oh, so sick. Yep. Yeah,
they're all really cool. But also with these guys, don't forget they also invested time to do their craft.
Yeah, for sure.
Like like in particular, let's say for example for Dr. Wu, I mean, he the way he got into the tattoo game was he actually he worked at a tattoo parlor and he was sweeping floors for like I think 2 years before he was even given like a gun to start testing if he even tattoo.
Yeah.
So everybody kind of like did their time and like observed and like kind of paid their dues, which I think is important.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, that is the end of the first part. Thank you guys for listening. And then tune in to the second part where Fed and us will be talking mostly about his watch collecting. So see you guys on the second part. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List Podcast.